Hello, everyone. My name is Brennan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator, and welcome to this somewhat impromptu episode of The Guest Awakens, presented by Page Turners They Were Not. Returning to the show, it's Chris and Robert Adams of the Cinefanatics. Hello, gentlemen.
Woo!
Hello.
Hello, Brennan.
Hello, 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 hello.
Those of you listening did not get to see some of the shenanigans that went on getting this podcast going because I was totally confused. Rutherford had suggested a topic, and I thought he meant for their show. But nope, you get it on my show. So this will be fun. So we're kind of going to talk a little bit about the state of the fandom. Um, and to be clear, we're only talking about certain elements of the fandom, not the Star Wars fandom as a whole. But, things have been a little interesting lately. So I'm just going to throw it over to Robert because this is sort of his idea for an episode. What is so? Let's just jump right in, man. What was it in particular, Robert, that prompted a desire for this episode?
So what's really prompting this is it's kind of interesting watching everything that happened in regards to the Acolyte, which at the time of this recording, the Acolyte's been done for like what about 2 weeks or so now?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, week or two. I don't know. Time is a construct.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, throughout that episode, we saw different kind of things play out online. And granted, some of this is going to be kind of what you see firsthand foremost from say like Twitter or X if you want to. It's keeping in mind that really is its own like little bubble that doesn't necessarily represent fandom as a whole, but it
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of times where I saw people having issue with the current state of Star Wars. It was primarily all on like say Twitter or random like YouTubers comments. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're doing a reaction or a review to episodes of The Acolyte, seeing some of the comments down below. It could go from anywhere, just someone just giving their overall opinion, which a lot of times we're seeing these tend to skew negative. It is the you're just stupid if you enjoy this show. You are simple minded if you enjoy this show. So it could go from something like that to if anyone is producing content or giving an opinion of it, you are positive to it, you're quickly labeled a shill, which is showing basically people don't know what shill means. So, for clarification, shill is someone who is paid, in this case, for this example, paid by Disney to say positive things to boost making the show look good, which I understand the concept of that. The issue is people are throwing out shills when you're not looking at where it's coming from. Like for our channel currently has about a little over 2,000 subscribers. We've had times where if we've said something positive on something that we see a lot of people have negative opinions on, they'll call us shills. We only have a reach of over 2,000 people. No production company or studio is paying us for any
Mm-hmm.
positive feedback. We're not reaching enough people. Why would you do that? Why would a studio logically do that as a business decision? It wouldn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense. But yet people are
So,
throwing out shill automatically.
Yes,
so there's
Chris.
another, there's another aspect to the shill thing. It isn't just receiving monetary gain from a studio. There
Mm-hmm.
are plenty of YouTubers out there who have been invited out by Lucasfilm to hang out with like Dave Filoni or whatnot. And people see that publicly and say, well, of course, you're never going to say anything bad about a Star Wars show because you get to hang out with the creators of Star Wars right now. And they'll use that as the example for saying shill. The problem with that is that being invited out by Lucasfilm to hang out and everything does not guarantee, that that person's always going to have a positive thing to say about the product necessarily. So it's not a good thing to lean on in terms of an argument against people who just happen to like the show because they like the show, you know.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed lately is this idea that some of us, like myself, who genuinely like this stuff,
Mhm.
this story, we genuinely like it, and there are many who want to make an excuse and say that you're not being, basically that we're being toxically positive.
Mhm.
That's something that gets thrown around a bit. That somebody, I think last year, had a tweet that said the reason we keep getting, as they put it, mediocre Star Wars content is because too many fans are afraid to say anything negative. Well, to that I would say all you have to do is look online, and there is not a fear of being negative. In fact, there's a fear of being positive, I would argue right now.
Yeah.
Sort of swing things around on the media before we sound like we're going to be a very depressing podcast. I think that certainly we have seen with the Acolyte some really nasty negativity. And I would argue that that's kind of how it's been for the last 7 years. The moment The Last Jedi came out, it felt like everything changed,
Yeah.
I would argue. And there was certainly negativity when The Phantom Menace, well,
Mhm.
well, that's a whole nother story, but I did The Force Awakens when that came out. There was a little bit, but you didn't hear a lot of it. It wasn't
So
dominating the conversation.
that was a thing that I was thinking of. Like I was born in the early 80s,
Mhm.
so I grew up with the original trilogy, and that was it. As far as I knew Star Wars, that was there was always talks that Lucas was wanting to do that he made them as episode 4, 5, and 6, that at some point there was a story of episode 1, 2, and 3, and then 7, 8, and 9, but we never had like any confirmation this was actually going to happen. So when I grew up with the original trilogy, the most negative I heard is people didn't like all the puppets in Return of the Jedi or the Ewoks at the end, that
Yeah.
that was a little too kid friendly and stuff.
Mhm.
And like my brother here was born late 80s, so he also for a majority of his childhood only had the original trilogy to go off of.
Mhm.
10 years
And
anyway.
yeah. And then they released the special editions in the
Mhm.
theater back in 1997, and they made changes to it. This is where I first heard like the first major part of like fandom for the most part. And keep in mind, this was in 1997 when these movies came out.
Mhm.
The
The
early days of the
internet
internet.
is, yeah, the internet is still effectively in dial-up AOL, welcome, you've got
Mhm.
mail type of days, and we don't have things like Twitter and social media. Like maybe there might have been like message boards in the earlier
Yeah.
days,
Could you imagine what it
but
would be like if social media had existed when The Empire Strikes Back came out? Because to those of you listening
oh yeah.
who may not be aware, it was not universally well received. Which is hard to
I,
imagine nowadays, but at the time, yeah, you can find some reviews from 1980 from
mhm,
critics that were less than positive. I once read one that says the idea that they could take these one-dimensional cardboard cutout characters and try to give them depth is ridiculous. These are things that's hard for us to imagine today. But it would have been interesting to see what it would have been like at the time. The same thing with prequels, and certainly there was a degree of not social media as we know it today, but there
Yeah.
was a certain sociality on the internet.
Mm.
And of course, I just rewatched Community from around 2010, and there's a couple jokes in there about the prequels that don't land well anymore, just because they feel very tired. But as far as the modern sort of thing, when Force Awakens came out, overall, the reaction was quite positive. I think the worst thing you would hear someone say is, it's too much like A New Hope. That's maybe the worst thing people would say. Rogue One got good reaction, and then Last Jedi came out and challenged everything. Or did it really challenge everything? I think the answer is not really. It just, but I think that we're living in an interesting time. Because as you probably saw, during the run of The Acolyte, there were certain Gen X fans holding funerals for Star Wars,
Yeah.
saying that
Star Wars
Star
has
Wars was
died.
dead and gone, and this is very similar to the reaction. I'm sure they said the same thing when the prequels came out. And
Mhm.
here we are 25 years later, and Star Wars is not dead.
That's what I was pointing out. Like with the special editions, we got the whole Han Solo is no
Mm-hmm.
longer
Yeah.
shooting first. You got the prequels, all the issues that people had with like Jar Jar Binks in
Mm-hmm.
episode one and kind of carried on type of thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
there have been times where fandom for Star Wars has just been completely like, oh, this is so terrible. They're ruining my Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But it hasn't seen the level that it's at until now. And granted, yes, a lot of it is because of Twitter. Twitter gives a voice
Mm-hmm.
to the voiceless, so to speak.
So now
Every single person,
threads.
yeah,
So now
everyone is
threads does
able
not
to
have that.
promote their idea.
So now threads has escaped that, and I don't know how. But
Oh, really? I
but
need to join
but
Threads.
Twitter is.
Yeah.
But Twitter is all buzz with it. But as I said, we don't want to be too negative.
Yeah.
But I think that it's
I
important to point out that every time fans say Star Wars is dead, a new project comes along that they actually like.
Hmm.
Remember when everyone was saying that Rise of Skywalker killed Star Wars, and then Mandalorian comes out, and for 2 seasons, everyone goes, "This is the greatest thing ever." And then Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi come out, and people loudly complain about those. Then Andor comes out, and everyone says, "This is the most amazing thing ever." So it's funny you see these ups and downs with the reaction of certain fans. Now, I think I was actually talking to my dad about this earlier today. People who are generally positive and like the new stuff, they have less to say than those who don't like it.
Hmm.
So if you're on X or Twitter and you think this represents all fans, it's like, no, this just represents those who don't like it because the average person who does like it isn't going to go and write 3 paragraphs about why it's the worst thing ever created. Um, so there is that, and I think that to quote Lando Calrissian from The Rise of Skywalker, there are more of us. So it's interesting, but you're right that the platform has given people the ability to share their rather negative takes. And let's take a step back for a second here. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't like this show or this movie, because everybody should have the right to say that.
Hmm.
If it comes down to hate filled vitriol toward the creators or other fans, racism, sexism, homophobia, well, and things like that. That's not good. That's where it gets into the negative side. But saying, "Hey, it didn't work for me," is fine. So let's get into that. So, Chris, I'll start with you. Let's just talk about, because it's the most recent, the Acolyte. As a whole, how did it work? Did it work for you? Did it not work for you?
So I
Just
have actually utilized social media to basically say that there is quite a bit that I do like about the Acolyte, quite a bit that I think they did very well. There are things that I take issue with. As a whole, I think the show probably is my least favorite of the Star Wars shows that are out there.
mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, like you're not going to hear me, go off on one subject or the other. I've been known to bring up that I just think there are some issues with like character motivations here and there,
Mm-hmm.
and what choices they made, why they made those
Yeah.
choices,
And those are
and how
legitimate
and how
concerns.
how the plot was presented
Yeah.
and moved forward. Those I think that's so there's a difference between like legitimate criticism and then just complaining about whatever the hot topic social issue of the day is
Mm-hmm.
to try to bring up and force into the bubble of talking about Star Wars. That's not real criticism. That's not something
Yeah.
I would ever consider real criticism. And what I bring up, I would consider what would be real criticism. Talking about the structure of creating the art, not necessarily the ideas behind what you think are like social politics that people might have creating the art.
Yeah. No, you're right, because legitimate criticism is, the directing, writing, acting. If those things don't work for you,
Mm-hmm.
then that's legitimate reasons.
I
Robert, go ahead, Chris. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, I'll say that. Like, listen again, Acolyte is my least favorite of the Star Wars shows that have been out so far, but I'm still very much looking forward to a season two. The certain aspects that they brought up, the fun little Easter eggs, a character
Mhm.
hidden in the shadows, I am very eager to see brought into live action and see how that story plays out. Regardless of my issues with whatever, writing this, that, and the other happened in the first season, I very much think that you have the opportunity in a second season to kind of course correct a little bit. Everyone should be given the second chance.
Mhm.
And so I think the second season, we have a lot of opportunity to see some really fun stuff in the show.
Yep.
And there's no reason why they shouldn't be given a second season for that.
Yep. Robert, your thoughts on the show just overall?
Uh, so like I'm not as in depth. Like I love Star Wars, but I'm not as in depth on the lore as like say my brother is, as very likely as much as you are, Brennan.
Mhm.
But I like what the show was trying to do. I think it was a very small story, a very tiny, like little piece of the larger universe,
In
which I know that's Star
microcosm.
Wars in general,
Yeah.
but I want to see more of what was happening in this time period, not necessarily what was going on with these two sisters,
Hmm.
so to speak. Like I want to know more of what, and that's where I think, kind of like to Chris's point, that's where they may take a season two. This may have just been a starting story. Let's get in, let's familiarize ourselves with some characters that we could then follow as they expand on this. Because really, in this world, we don't have any like anchor points from characters that we're aware of. I mean, obviously we saw Yoda, but I mean Yoda's not a huge major part of this.
Hmm.
Um, we don't have Luke Skywalker. We don't have Anakin Skywalker. We don't have a lot of characters we're familiar with. They needed to set up some characters that we can kind of latch onto and like, okay, well, let's go and continue following the wacky adventures of May and Osha as they explore this High Republic timeline.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to see more of that. I think this story was a little too far out there in that specific piece and not showing us enough other than like the shadowy figure in the finale. But I want to see more of that, like build upon that, which is what I'm hoping season two does. So as long as that's where they take it, that's fine. But that would be my opinion is, and this is something else I see a lot. is my opinion is like a to be continued. I need to see
Good
if
point.
they do a season two, what they do with that season two, and that would make me probably have more respect for season one. And it's a
Mm.
lot of people that after like the first episode or two of The Acolyte were already like, this is the worst show ever. You can't say it's the worst show ever. You haven't seen it all yet.
They were
So,
Yeah.
jumping to conclusions. They were coming to these ideas that this is how the story's going to play out.
Well,
As in, oh man, everybody knows about the Sith now, and we were told that they don't know about the Sith in the Phantom Menace. Well, no.
as you heard online, people yelling, "These guys don't care about the lore." It's
By
like
the end of the
wait
show,
till the end of the season.
by the end of the show, we know
It's like that's how that information didn't get out.
no one alive doesn't know about the Sith.
Yep. Yeah, no, this is actually a rather pressing topic because Rings of Power season 2 is coming out at the end of this month.
Mhm.
The reaction to the first season was overall pretty good, but a lot of people were of the opinion that maybe the season 2 will really give them more of complete the picture more for them. Meaning that maybe season 1 didn't work for them as well. But maybe the second season will give them what they maybe thought was missing. And, I hope so too. I mean, I love The Acolyte. I love it. There are things that I am going to have to think about for a long time before I can really tell you how I feel because it's not an easy show to digest. There's a lot there. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts, a lot of moral questions that there aren't easy answers to, which is interesting. And certainly there was a lot of moments where I was a little confused on character motivations. But I think that what they're doing here is just my own opinion. If people think this is the worst thing ever, I don't know what show they watched.
Secret
I
Invasion.
mean, I don't mean to be. Well, Secret Invasion unfortunately did not work for me
Yeah.
back in the day.
Listen, kind of,
Or
but
a lot of
it's kind
people.
of the same thing. The MCU has a lot of the same kind of criticisms, a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
to a certain extent. That MCU didn't have like this huge giant lore and story already
That's true.
established when Disney took over, but
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that I'm interested in the second season. I really do like a lot of the new characters. Um, because we're spoiling it on this show, regardless of what Soul did, he's still one of my favorite Star Wars characters because he's fallible. I think I like that.
Mhm.
But as a show overall, there are elements about it that maybe don't click as well. But I'm not giving up on the show, and I'm not giving up on Star Wars. Rather, you and I were talking about this before Chris came in, but there are people drawing a distinction between Disney Star Wars and Star Wars. And they're saying that Disney Star Wars is not quote unquote real Star Wars, which, well, I think it's kind of funny that some of the people of a certain age are hating on the new Disney Star Wars, but 20 years ago they were doing the same thing to the prequels. And now many of them are not
actually,
including that when they talk about the Disney Star Wars era. It just seems a bit like selective memory to me in the case of many of them. But I think that it's fair if they don't like the new stuff. I mean, nobody's saying you have to. It's just to say that it's not Star Wars. I mean, it's Star Wars whether you like it or not. And the one thing about it is, even if you don't like it, even if it does not work for you at all, it doesn't affect the original films. Meaning that those are always going to be good.
mhm.
Like nothing could change that.
Mm.
Like I
Yeah.
remember when Phantom Menace came out, there were people saying that George Lucas has destroyed our childhoods. If you think that a movie you didn't like will destroy the original trilogy, I think that's a big, mistake because the original trilogy are some of the greatest films ever made, and everybody agrees on that, pretty much. And nothing that you come up with now is going to ruin it. Maybe it's not for you, maybe it doesn't work, but it certainly wouldn't ruin it. And so, what are your guys' thoughts on that kind of idea that this quote unquote Disney Star Wars is not destroying Star Wars because you can't really destroy Star Wars? Rather, your thoughts on that?
So I have the idea of also what I think people don't take into account is roughly at the time that Lucasfilm was purchased by Disney, that was also the time where George Lucas himself is like, yeah, I'm getting too old to be continuing to make these movies. I'm going to sell it to Disney,
Mm-hmm.
let Disney take charge of it, which I know that's a lot of people's complaints, but when you are focused on this is Disney Star Wars, this isn't my Star Wars, you ultimately don't have a choice because George Lucas wasn't continuing to make those movies. It wasn't George Lucas's Star Wars anymore, anyways. Even if Disney hadn't purchased it, George Lucas was effectively saying that he was getting too old to make these movies. He was going to end up having to hand them off to other filmmakers to continue
Mm-hmm.
that legacy, anyways. And we may have been in the same position here. Also, the fact that yeah, I understand that there's like years of like the expanded universe stuff that were in the books
Oh,
and the
yes.
comics and other potential movies that may or may not now be canon. And I understand it from the viewpoint of like a lot of fans, it may have been something that they held canon, even if it wasn't officially canon. For me as a kid, I remember reading Shadows of the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for that story at that time. No reason for that story not to be canon, even though I don't think it was ever officially 100% considered canon, even though it was a book that had a soundtrack and a
The,
video
the,
game.
the
So,
canon rules of that era were rather confusing,
yeah.
if you're
But a lot of
familiar with
people,
those.
they left it up to the fans to decide what could be
Yeah,
considered canon or not.
good
So when
point.
you effectively, when Disney bought it and said, hey, anything other than the movies and these very specific TV shows that we're talking about, anything other than that, no longer canon, get them out of your head. It is like a personal attack on some people because that is their childhood. That is their memories. That's what they grew up believing
Mm-hmm.
and loving and enjoying. And you're a giant company taking that away. I can understand that argument. But the thing to keep in mind is this is Star Wars from here on out. If you want Star Wars, it's coming from Disney.
Yeah.
I mean, it leaves it up to you. If you don't like the state of Star Wars, as you may see a lot of people say online, don't watch it. People are still continuing to watch it. Disney Plus is getting those numbers because people are hate watching for a certain extent. They're watching it and then they would complain about it, or they may end up liking it. But yeah, it's a lot like the MCU. People watch something, they like it, then they watch the next thing, they don't like it, the next thing they like, and it just goes on and on like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it can get kind of aggravating
And
when you're reading into fandom and how people like it. And I don't know if this is necessarily people who are saying this in order to gain clicks, because we do see negativity is pretty popular at some points.
mm-hmm.
So I don't know if people are necessarily saying it to increase those clicks, those views, or if they're saying it, maybe they don't know how to accurately get their feelings and their opinions across, and it just comes off wrong, that they're not intentionally wanting it to sound that way, which
Mm-hmm.
I completely get that. I'm very awkward myself, as you probably can hear. But yeah, it's just that's the state of how we're looking at it right now. I don't want to be like mean or negative, like, hey, you just got to deal with it. This is Star Wars, but it's keeping it an open mind that, at least from what we've seen so far, Dave Filoni loves Star Wars. He is a true diehard Star Wars fan, and he is effectively doing the best that he can. And I think that's all we can really expect out of anyone.
Mhm. Chris, your thoughts on
Uh,
the idea that Disney Star Wars isn't destroying Star Wars because you can't really destroy Star Wars.
Yeah, I think the idea of like, hey, the old movies, they're still there. You can watch them. They still exist. Slight joke, they'll never change. Well, George Lucas changed them. But
Oh,
that's
there's
that's
that.
leave that leave that aside. The fact of the matter is yeah, no, the movies as a whole, they do still exist. So folks who, you know, just really love the original trilogy, but they're not a fan of anything that came after, or they love the original trilogy prequels and they're not a fan of anything that came after. By all means, you have 6 movies that you can go back and watch at any time.
Hmm.
Um, as far as the Disney Star Wars stuff, my brother was saying it pretty well. The fact of the matter is Disney owns Star Wars. That's it.
Hmm.
If you want to keep watching Star Wars, you're welcome to have criticism, obviously. You're welcome to say that didn't connect with me. I'm not a fan of that. We've covered this on this topic tonight already. You're welcome to not like something. Everyone has an opinion. Not everything works for everybody. Not
Hmm.
everything's going to work for everybody. It's ridiculous to assume that a single piece of art can connect with everybody the way the original artists and creators intend to connect with as many people as possible. So the fact of the matter is Acolyte didn't work for me as much as other shows. I really liked Obi-Wan. I know a lot of people didn't like Obi-Wan.
You've
I
come to the
enjoyed
right
the book.
place. I love that show.
Yeah, I enjoyed the Book of Boba Fett. I had a good
Yep.
time with it.
Yep.
I know a lot of people didn't. I was not on board with the first 2 episodes of Andor. I got on board by the third one.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people are like, this might be too
Yeah.
slow. And then
Yeah.
once they watch the whole thing, they're like, this
And
is
then yeah,
incredible.
I'm eagerly anticipating rewatching the first season again before the second season comes
Yeah,
out.
I just rewatched the first season. It is so good.
So
I have yet to watch the first season, so
when we're gonna get them there, we're gonna get them there.
Well, here's the funny thing. Now that you mentioned Andor, there are people I am aware of who have hated Star Wars essentially, or disliked it since The Empire Strikes Back, as in, there is a certain crowd that has never liked Return of the Jedi,
Mhm.
and for 40 years have been, basically only like the first 2 Star Wars films, and that's it. And some of these people liked Andor. So before people run around saying Star Wars is dead, it's like, well, what about that one show you really liked? If Star Wars is dead, how come that show worked for you?
Mhm.
Meaning that in the sense of you've got at least one thing that works for you in the new era, and that's something. Um, but I think that kind of swerving to a little bit more positive is let's talk for a minute about what are our favorite things about, like not just about, but like favorite pieces of modern Star Wars canon that we absolutely love, moments or episodes or certain shows or movies. So rather, we'll start with you. Just what are some of your top things about the modern Star Wars?
I hate to kind of say this because I know that there's one that I really like that I know my brother also really enjoys. Um, and that is the progression of the character of Ahsoka,
God
going
dang it!
from, huh?
Yes.
Yeah,
Brendan, why
I
don't you
think
go to
that
me
like
first?
almost honestly,
You can have
I
the same
figured that would
answer. I
actually be
mean,
your answer also. It
you can
is.
have the same answer. There's no rule that says you can't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot to talk about given this one character. They gave us a character that was supposed to be kind of like an audience surrogate for the Clone Wars,
The Wesley
and
Crusher
everyone's like, "Oh,
of Star Wars.
yeah, she's a little teenager. She's annoying. She's just whining and I don't want to follow this. This is stupid. Blah 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 blah." And what they did with her character over the course of the Clone Wars, and especially coming in with that final season, the actual final season, and
Yes.
then moving her onto her own show. This is some of the best stuff that they've probably done with Star Wars in a while, in my opinion. I love adding that on to the end of
Yeah.
everything, in my opinion. Yeah.
I want to
No,
highlight real quick. That's coming from somebody who has yet to watch Tales of the Jedi. Also,
oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that adds
I
even more to it. So
mm-hmm.
yeah.
yeah, no, I think you're right because yet again, when she was introduced 3 years after the prequels had ended, there was still a little bit of the anti-prequel attitude, and we get this little character Ahsoka. I think reminded people in many ways of young Anakin in terms of being like this annoying kid in a Star Wars project. And I even remember at the time, I know one guy, I won't say his name, who declared that Star Wars is dead and Ahsoka had killed it. Well, here we are all these many years later, and she's one of the most popular characters in the entire saga. And
I do want
it's
roasted crow for dinner. That sounds delicious.
it's so funny because yeah, I would agree that I'm not the biggest fan of the Clone Wars movie. And I wasn't the biggest fan of the Ahsoka at the time. But now I am. I'm looking at my Funko of her right now. It, I mean, it's amazing to see this character that, yet again, as we've been talking about, something that people did not like at the time. Now it's become
Mm-hmm.
a fan favorite, and that's another thing that's interesting is the way that art works sometimes. It's throughout Hollywood history. There have been so many films that were not liked when they first came out, and now they are considered all-time classics. It kind of makes you wonder what in like, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, how are people going to feel overall about the Disney era of Star Wars? So, Chris, so Ahsoka is also one of your favorite things to come out of modern era. Any other things that really stand out as being the high point?
Yeah. I mean, I was initially going to say anything and everything Ahsoka is 100%
Yes.
the best, one of the best parts about the modern era. The other aspect of that, honestly, like my biggest answer really is just the multitude of well-developed characters that we've gotten either introduced or reintroduced back into Star Wars.
Hmm.
Thrawn is one of the best
Yes.
villains
Yes.
in Star Wars history. Homeboy got his reintroduction on a cartoon
Yeah.
on Rebels, and it's arguable. I know a lot of people probably started watching Rebels and going, "Oh, this feels definitely for kids." But like Clone Wars, I mean, the Clone Wars movie I think was definitely geared more towards kids, but the show itself, and just like Rebels, both shows started swaying more towards, hey, our audiences are being able to understand and retain information more. They're able to understand more about what's going on and the conflicts and everything. So we're going to veer those more. We're going to skew those more towards adults now. And when they introduced Thrawn in Rebels, that was very much an adult skewing move because I think Thrawn in how he presents himself in his villainy is very logical, is very tactical, and it's all it's all very much you got to have a certain level of understanding to kind of really get Thrawn, and that's what really made him one of the best villains. But it's that kind of stuff. It's all the characters that they introduced in Rebels, characters that we've had introduced in future shows, Fennec Shand,
Hmm.
the Bad Batch, Let's mention the Bad Batch too, because that's another great group of characters
Oh
that
my
we've
gosh,
gotten in modern
yes.
Star Wars. Just
Roku.
Grogu is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely a fan favorite. People love the little guy. People love the little guys in Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And he really hasn't said anything.
Mandalorian,
Yeah.
Din
Yeah.
Djarin.
I mean, there's so many things. Um, I think that what we're getting at here is there are all the things that people don't like. There's a lot of things that people do like.
Oh yeah,
And I think that what we see is that to those listening to the show, don't be deceived by what you see on social media as representing all of the things. That represents a small slice of what it is. Now, as far as we sort of come toward the end here, I mean, my favorite things of the Disney Star Wars era would definitely be Rebels.
Mhm.
Might be my favorite of all the shows. The Last Jedi is, as you can see behind me, it's one of my favorite things. Bad Batch was, I mean, season 3 of Bad Batch was magnificent. And actually, the whole show is. Andrew, of course, is I'm interested to get Robert's thoughts when he watches it. Mandalorian, all 3 seasons, I think are terrific. I think the just so many things. Clone Wars, just to me, it's just so many amazing parts of it. Some of the novels and like the High Republic are really good. And man, as you say, Grogu, also give a shout out to one of my favorite new additions, Little Leia from Obi-Wan Kenobi. To me, there's just so many wonderful things added to this galaxy that if it doesn't work for you, great. But if it does, great. So I
Can
guess
I
the message at the end of the day is you can like or dislike what you like online, just don't be a jerk about it. That's kind of the message to everybody. Is if you don't like something that somebody else does, let allow them the freedom to like it or dislike it, um, as they so choose. However, of course, if their opinions are based on homophobia or transphobia or sexism or
Yeah.
racism, those are opinions that should not be tolerated.
Mhm.
But when it comes to just whether you like it, whether you don't, as long as you let people enjoy what they like and not like what they don't like, that's all there needs to be. And many of us, we can't change the discourse entirely, but each of us can do our own part to add some degree of kindness to that discourse. Chris, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just I wanted to interject real quick, kind of maybe a proper way of positioning a perspective on this. Um, we were talking about Ahsoka, bringing up Bad Batch as another example of modern Star Wars. There's a character that was introduced in Bad Batch, Omega,
Yes.
who very easily, um, watching the first couple episodes, I was like, oh, this could very easily be another Ahsoka situation with this character where people are going to be like, oh, this annoying little kid. I don't know about this. But I distinctly remember watching those first few episodes and going, you know what? Yeah, it's a little kid, but I bet you anything by the time this series is done, I'm going to love this character.
Mm-hmm.
Prediction came true. Omega is one of my favorite characters in Star Wars as a whole.
Yeah.
Hey, spoilers, I
And
haven't seen Bad Batch yet. I don't know I'm supposed to like this character.
Well,
So
we'll see what you think once you watch it.
basically, the perspective I'm saying is recognize that, like, yeah, maybe you don't like something right at first, but instead of quickly rushing to social media and jumping to conclusions and immediately deciding to use the harshest tones and terms to blast this 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 long running story that you love so much, maybe take a step back and go, hey, you know what? I'm going to trust the creators for a minute, and I'm going to see this thing play out. I'm going to see how it comes out in the wash at the end of everything. My opinion might change by the end of this. I'll say this as well for me, the sequel trilogy. I wasn't as big a fan of the sequel trilogy when it all first came out, but each movie I was like, you know what? Let me see how this trilogy is at the end of it. And going through Rise of Skywalker for me is my favorite of the trilogy. I know
Thank you.
that's a weird statement for a lot
Thank
of
you.
people, but Rise of Skywalker is my favorite
Hey,
of the
I've got a
sequel
Rise of
trilogy.
Skywalker poster on my wall, so
Yeah. So in this situation, it's let it play out. Now, over many repeated viewings, because like it or not, the sequel trilogy is canon.
hmm
So when I do my entire Star Wars watch throughs, I'm going to watch through the sequel trilogy, even though I like the original and the prequel trilogy more. But
hmm
over time with those rewatches, the sequel trilogy is warming up more and more and more. And there's 2 points behind that for me. One, I think at any point they could introduce an animated show between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens that's like Clone Wars, fills in a lot of the gaps and really amplifies the sequel trilogy in a new way too. I think at any point we could get something like that, and that's huge. But also understand that I grew up with the prequel trilogy. I know a lot of people who grew up with the original trilogy maybe didn't like the prequels. There's a lot of kids who grew up nowadays with the sequel trilogy. That's their Star Wars. And when they get to be my age, when they get to be all our age, they're going to look back at the sequel trilogy and be like, I love that just as much as I love the prequels and the original trilogy. It's all great Star Wars to me.
hmm
So that's the big thing to understand is a lot of people just run to conclusions. They jump to conclusions. They're rash. They're harsh. But we all need to just take that time, step back, and just like, hey, let me understand this from a bigger perspective, from a bigger picture. Let me take in the full season of a show. Let me take in the full trilogy of movies, and then let me rewatch it a couple times if I'm so inclined. I might find that I actually really do enjoy this over time instead of being harsh on the internet and ruining the experience for other people, you know?
Yeah, brother, your thoughts
Like
as we
final thoughts.
conclude? Yeah.
I fully believe that Ewoks Battle for Endor and Caravan of Courage are canon,
hmm
and I will die by
Wilford
whatever.
Brimley is
Uh,
canon.
um,
Wilford Brimley is canon.
But not
yeah,
say not the
Wilford,
holiday special.
Mm-mm.
not the holiday special, but the two Ewoks. Yeah, maybe the droids cartoon. Yeah.
Mm.
Definitely
Um.
Lego Star Wars.
Yes.
Yeah. Like ultimately, I want to see more people be more positive overall. Like if you don't like something, then it's fine if you don't like it, but I have no idea why we're in a position that you criticize other people for their opinions.
hmm
Like I get it if you don't agree with like a critic. There's my brother and I, we critique movies ourselves. We do stuff in the film critiquing industry. There are people that both of us absolutely love to follow because we see some of the same ideas. There's some people I don't follow.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily because I don't like their opinions, it's just they may not have the same viewpoint and stuff that I do. A couple of the ones that I like are primarily around the same age as myself, that have the same experiences as myself.
hmm
And I like to see stuff like that. So when I see someone sitting there saying like, uh, this new Star Wars show is trash and anybody who likes it is needs therapy or some kind of like a lobotomy or something like extreme
Mm-hmm.
like that. I'm like, that's very harsh statement that you're trying to get. I feel like you're personally just trying to get it for clicks, while a reasonable, provoking person is going to be like, well, let's look at who this person is, what's their background, what's their age, what's their experiences that they have shared publicly, and do I kind of agree or follow along with what they're saying? So yeah, a lot of my favorite reviewers, critiquers follow the same kind of thing that I'm into, and that's why I like following them. So that would be my thing is like try to stop the overall gatekeeping of it as far as the opinion goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say instead of doing that, put out your opinion of it in a friendly way. Absolutely. If you don't like it, feel free to share that. But keep in mind a bunch of different things before you share that. Are you only 2 episodes in? Then give your opinion of the 2 episodes instead of the entire series because you
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen it all yet.
Mhm.
It's not possible for you to critique the whole
Yeah.
series. And then also, maybe, I know this might be hard for some people who make content. Give us a little bit of your background, your connection to it. Just, you don't have to sit here and tell us your life story every single piece of content, but when
Mm-hmm.
you're making content, put something in there that a viewer or a listener or a reader could connect with so we can understand like what is your viewpoint, how are you seeing it. Those of us that may have had a very similar background, we can connect with that, and that helps the overall opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the people who I follow, they've liked things that I have not liked, and vice versa. I still follow their opinion because we're not exactly the same person. There's going to be small, like little differences. And I love that about the people that I follow. So,
Well, very well said. Well, guys, those of you listening, we've gone all over the place with this, but that's kind of how it is nowadays. But I do want to thank our guest today, Robert and Chris. Thank you so much for suggesting this topic and coming on the show. Where can the people find you?
so you can find us as a part of the Cinefanatics or as the Cinefanatics. We are
Mm-hmm.
on youtube.com/Cinefanatics. On social media, we are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok as or at the Cinefanatics. Me personally, you can follow on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Letterbox at RCA Reacts
Mm-hmm.
and youtube.com/at RCA Reacts.
All right, Chris, where can we find you?
You can follow me at Chris Adams MLP on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd, as well as twitch.tv/Chris Adams MLP. And her name is Ray Skywalker.
Yes, it is. That is her name. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you everyone for listening. My name is Brennan, that noisy green for the ventilator. Thank you for tuning in to this discussion on The Guest Awakens. But in this case, The Guests Awaken presented by Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you.